In the last two confessions, I told you about the burning ball that Earth became, the half-dead, half-burning world left behind, and I told you about the wars, the endless fighting over water, bread, and fuel that devoured nations until the air stank of rot and smoke. But what I have not yet told you, what you must now hear, is the story of the third regret, the most insidious, the most soul-crushing, because war kills the body. But what came next killed the spirit, and it came dressed not in the language of violence, but in the language of fairness, of chance, of hope. They called it the lottery, the global continuity program, the promise that anyone, no matter where they were born, no matter their wealth, no matter their bloodline, might be chosen to board the ships that would carry humanity into the skies. But listen to me, because I was there, and I will tell you the truth. There was never any fairness, never any chance. The lottery was the greatest illusion ever staged, a theater of hope, built to keep billions docile while the powerful secured their escape. And this is how it worked. This is how humanity auctioned its own soul. In the beginning, it seemed like salvation. Screens lit up in cities, even as those cities crumbled, giant billboards glowing with lists of names, voices on radio waves promising a fair chance for all, and people gathered in ruins, clutching one another, eyes fixed on the screens, waiting to see their family name appear. And when it did, when a child's surname flashed in blue against the ash-gray sky, screams of joy erupted. People fell to their knees, neighbors cheered, and for a moment it felt as if the nightmare might end. But then the rules were revealed, rules written not for compassion, but for division. Only one per family, only one per household, only one per 10,000 drawn, only one per district, and each winner meant 100 marked as surplus, denied forever. Imagine the cruelty. A mother told she could go, but her child could not. A boy told his name was chosen, but his father was condemned. A sister chosen while her twin was branded excess. And families tore themselves apart, arguing in ash-covered kitchens, screaming in basements lit by candles, breaking under the weight of impossible choices. Some chose to tear up their lottery letters, to refuse salvation if it did not include their family. But when soldiers came to enforce compliance, to drag winners to the embarkation centers, refusal became betrayal. And neighbors reported one another in whispers. She refused her ticket. He tried to hide his child, and soldiers tore people from one another with the mechanical efficiency of bureaucrats, while the lottery screen kept flashing names, cold and indifferent. And then came the rumors, because in every desperate system, rumors become currency. If you bribed the right officer, you could move your name up the list. If you volunteered for experiments, your child might be chosen. If you confessed your sins in a government-run church, your number might be pulled. And people believed they believed because belief was all they had left. And so markets sprang up around the lottery. Black markets where forged tickets sold for fortunes in food or flesh. Temples where self-proclaimed prophets promised divine intervention. Laboratories where volunteers were strapped to machines, told, "This will ensure your family's survival, even as electrodes seared their flesh." But the truth was darker still, because the lottery was never random, it was never chance. Behind the curtains, algorithms scanned the population, parsing bloodlines, genetic sequences, skilled profiles, purchase histories, search data, everything humanity had ever surrendered to the networked world, and the algorithms ranked them, not for fairness, not for equality, but for utility. Who could work the machines? who carried the least genetic risks, who could breed strong children on Mars, who could serve the elite already guaranteed a place. And so luck was nothing but the shadow of old databases, a fiction played across glowing screens. And entire communities discovered this too late, learned that they were never going to be chosen because their DNA was flagged decades earlier by corporations, that their bloodlines were classified as excess before they were even born. Still, billions clung to the illusion because illusion is sweeter than despair. And so they gathered nightly at the screens, praying, chanting, screaming when a neighbor's name appeared, rioting when weeks passed without a single local chosen, but always returning, always waiting, because to turn away was to admit the truth that they had already been condemned. Some nations took the lottery further, turning it into spectacle. Televised drawings where children in ceremonial clothes pulled numbers from glass bowls, confetti falling from the ceiling, announcers declaring humanity continues, while the audience wept with joy. But behind the cameras, behind the bright lights, the winners were led not to ships, but to holding pens, their names discarded, their families dispersed, the spectacle a distraction, while elites boarded the real vessels in silence. Other regimes twisted the lottery into something even crueler, the sacrifice draw, where communities were told that for one to leave, one must stay behind willingly, and so old men poisoned themselves, mothers slit their wrists, children walked into fires believing they had purchased salvation for their kin, but the ships never came. The promises were lies, and the sacrifices were ashes in the wind. This was the world's greatest psychological experiment, a way to see how far humanity would go when survival was turned into currency. And the answer was, all the way. Families split themselves apart, neighbors betrayed one another, prophets sold forgiveness, scientists auctioned genes, and billions died still clutching scraps of paper that told them they had once been chosen. And all the while, the ships rose, fleets carrying the powerful, the wealthy, the connected, those whose places had been secured not by chance but by money, influence, bloodlines, and contracts signed decades earlier, while below them billions screamed, billions begged, billions tore at the gates, holding forged papers, demanding to be let in, and soldiers fired into the crowds until the ground ran red, and the screens kept blinking names as if nothing had happened. This was the third regret, not only that survival was sold, but that humanity surrendered to illusion, that we accepted the lie of chance rather than demanding the truth of compassion, that we let ourselves be divided by numbers and codes instead of united by need. I remember one night, the last night of the lottery in my city, the sky black with smoke, the screen flickering above the ruins of the square, and my sister's name appeared, glowing blue in the darkness, and she screamed with joy, grabbed my hand, told me we were saved, but then the rules scrolled beneath. Only one per family, only one may board, and soldiers dragged her from me, while I stood paralyzed, clutching her name in my fist, and she looked back once, just once, as if asking me to forgive her, though she had done nothing but be chosen, and then she was gone, swallowed by the embarkation gates, and I never saw her again. That is what the lottery did. It turned love into a wound, family into fracture, hope into a weapon. And yet, even after it collapsed, even after the last screens went dark, the damage lingered, because the survivors carried the memory, carried the shame, carried the knowledge that they had betrayed or been betrayed, that their lives were bought by illusions, and that guilt followed them even to Mars, whispering in every dome, in every ration line, in every night of restless sleep. You lived because someone else died, believing they had been chosen. This was humanity's great experiment and its great failure, and it is the reason that here, in 2300, even though we are equal in suffering, even though we claim humanity as our only religion, there are still silences in conversations, still shadows in families, still names that are never spoken, because the lottery left scars no dome can heal. But the lottery did not end with names on screens or soldiers at gates. It evolved, metastasized, because once you reduce survival to chance, once you make life itself a raffle, you open the door to every cruelty imagination can conjure. And humanity walked through that door without hesitation, desperate, divided, and blind. Some governments, fearful of riots, introduced merit lotteries, where instead of pure chance, you could earn points. Points for education, points for labor, points for genetic health, points for obedience. And suddenly, survival was not only a raffle, but a scoreboard, and families turned into contestants, studying for tests, bribing officials, mutilating themselves to pass medical inspections, parents forcing children into competitions because the prize was not a medal, but a seat on a ship, and whole cities became arenas of desperation. Imagine a marketplace where booths offered lottery prep like exam coaches, where families sold their last possessions to buy tutoring for their children in the hope their scores would climb, where desperate mothers signed contracts agreeing to sterilization in exchange for a few more points, where neighbors whispered about which diets would lower genetic risks, which drugs would cleanse the blood, and all of it was theater, because the points meant nothing. The algorithms had already chosen, but people believed. They believed because to not believe was to collapse. Then came the faith lotteries, because in times of despair, religion fills the cracks, and governments weaponized it, telling citizens that confessing sins, converting to sanctioned faiths, or donating to sacred causes could earn divine favor in the lottery. And so, churches filled not with prayer, but with bargaining, lines of the starving shuffling forward to priests who stamped papers, declaring them blessed, while outside the gates, execution squads burned heretics who refused to bow. There were even sacrifice lotteries broadcast as spectacles, whole towns gathered in arenas, names drawn, and the losers marched forward to be executed in exchange for their family's chance at survival, and the crowds cheered because cruelty had become entertainment and hope had been reduced to a blood-soaked bargain. And in the shadows, corporations twisted the system further, buying genetic patents, selling places on black markets, promising gene-cleaning treatments that would raise odds, and laboratories filled with volunteers strapped to tables told that if they survived the experiments, their families would ascend. But most did not survive, and their families still starved, and yet the queues never shortened, because hope, even false hope, is a stronger drug than despair. I remember the camps outside the embarkation zones, endless tents flapping in toxic winds, people gathered around radios waiting for names, children clutching scraps of paper with numbers scrawled, parents whispering lies about how their turn would come, and every week trucks rolled in carrying the chosen, only one per thousand, only one per family, only one per lie, and the rest dragged away as unfit, left to rot while the ships ascended. And then there were the cults, because where official lies thrive, unofficial ones flourish too. And lottery prophets appeared across the wastes, declaring they had visions of the next names, charging followers to join their sects, demanding sacrifices of food, flesh, and blood to guarantee selection. And desperate crowds obeyed, because when your child is dying of thirst, you will kneel before any altar that promises salvation. Some cults demanded that followers carve lottery numbers into their skin. Others forced members to drink poisons to prove faith. Still others offered their children as living offerings to supposed officials, only to watch them disappear into vans that never returned. And through it all, the screens kept glowing, the numbers kept flashing, the ships kept rising, and the crowds kept waiting, as if hypnotized by the rhythm of betrayal. The cruelty of the lottery was not only in its deception, but in its psychology. It turned every human into a gambler, addicted to the chance that tomorrow might be the day, that their name might appear, that their family might be spared. And like all gambling, it ruined them, drained them, hollowed them, until they were husks, clinging to hope instead of fighting for truth. Entire societies collapsed into silence, unwilling to rebel because our turn might come, unwilling to burn the embarkation centers because the next name might be ours. And so billions died in obedience, waiting until their bodies fell where they stood, while the screens still glowed indifferent above them. This is the deepest regret. Not only that survival was sold, but that we allowed ourselves to be controlled by illusion, that we believed in chance when we should have demanded justice, that we let algorithms decide who was fit, instead of remembering that all were worthy. When the final ships rose, when the last embarkation zones shut down, when the last screens flickered and died, Earth erupted in violence too late. Mobs stormed empty launch pads, burned offices of officials who had long since fled, tore apart the husks of screens that had lied to them, and all that remained were ashes, silence, and the sound of oceans boiling into the sky. And here, on Mars, even now, centuries later, the survivors carry that memory like a second skin. The guilt of being chosen, the shame of having lived while others died, the silence of names never spoken, the faces of siblings, parents, children left behind in the lie of the lottery. Every dome here has families who will not look one another in the eye because one was taken and another was left. Every ration line has whispers of, "She bought her ticket. He betrayed his neighbor." And no proclamation of equality can erase that memory, because survival itself became a crime, and we are all guilty. That is why we confess, why we tell you these regrets, because if you do not learn from them, you will repeat them. And the next lottery will not be staged on Earth. It will be staged here on Mars, when oxygen dwindles, when domes crack, when food runs out. And already I see it. Already I hear whispers of who will be chosen, who will be spared. And I know the cycle may repeat unless you, listening now, break it. And yet, as monstrous as the lottery was, it was not the last horror. Because when survivors reached Mars, they carried more than guilt. They carried sickness, engineered diseases born in the collapse, plagues bred in the camps, pathogens released by desperation, and those plagues nearly ended us before we even began again. That is the fourth regret, the age of engineered pandemics, and I will tell you about it in the next confession. But for now, remember this. When survival becomes a game of chance, no one wins, not even those who escape, because the price of survival was the death of our humanity, and that wound follows us still. Subscribe, follow, Keep your notifications alive, because the next chapter will show you how even after escaping Earth, we nearly destroyed ourselves again. Not with bombs, not with bullets, but with invisible killers born of our own arrogance. And if you thought the lottery was humanity's cruelest invention, wait until you hear how we turned sickness itself into a weapon.